When we talk about addiction and recovery, you'll frequently hear people saying stuff, we need more support, specifically money for programs for treatment. And apparently, I have some hope here. We got numbers out, and the number one place for listeners outside of the state of Utah to this podcast is a place called Ashburn, Virginia. Well, I'd never heard of Ashburn, Virginia, so I looked it up, and this is over the last 12 months. And it's 30 miles northwest of Washington, D.C., and it's considered part of the Washington metro area. So I'm making the presumption that maybe there are some people at the federal level who are watching or listening to this podcast and may say, hey, we need to work harder on helping people find recovery. How's that sound?
I mean, that sounds awesome to me.
I know. Well, I'm drawing a conclusion that may or may not be right, but what can I say? Welcome, everyone, to it, especially you in Ashburn, Virginia, to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm your host, Randall Carlisle, and my guest is Braden Robinson today, and you work in the field of recovery, right?
Yeah. So I'm in recovery myself as well. I've been in recovery for about 8 years. And
congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite the journey, quite the ride. But I started school pretty soon after I found recovery, and just graduated last year with my master's degree from Columbia University in New York.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was pretty proud of that. And
strange how the mind works better when you're in recovery than when you're in addiction. You know.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't think I would have ended up there if I was still where I was 8 years ago. So. I graduated, and throughout that whole journey, I've been involved in the recovery community, of course, and I've been a peer support specialist for most of that time as well, which has really been a foundational role and learning experience for me to broaden my recovery horizons and increase my skills and take care of myself better.
For people watching or listening, peer support specialist means, what do you do?
Yeah, totally. So it's a certification that I think every state but one has in the U.S., and it's a global thing that is utilized in mental health and substance use treatment spaces, in physical health spaces, criminal justice, really peer support. And the way that I talk about it right now is a workforce. It's a community of people in recovery who have been in recovery for at least a year, most often more than that. They do some training, get a certification, and then they're working alongside therapists, case managers in the behavioral health field primarily.
Why does the concept of peer support work so well? I mean, I've watched it in our program, and I've seen people respond so much better to people that they can relate to, as opposed to somebody who says, I have a PhD in whatever.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And more broadly, the concept of peer support is something that everybody understands, right? If I have a death in my family, the person that's going to be best able to help me is somebody who's been through that and been through that successfully, right? And so we've, as with my career and my work, we hone it into mental health and substance use. But there's folks in other states that do peer support in every setting you can imagine. They've shown it effective with diabetes care, with all kinds of things. And so to answer your question directly, though, I think that within mental health and substance use, you look at 12-step, right? That's a peer support model. It's different than the way that we talk about it in modern days with the workforce aspect of things, but that's still peer support, right? Native communities have been doing healing circles and peer support styles of support for their communities for centuries.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. And so really it underlies human connection is the ability to relate. If you and I have nothing in common, it's much harder for me to relate to you. And specifically when it comes to addiction and mental health, with how challenging it can be to find recovery, it's an easy first step to say, oh, this person walked through that. I can clearly see that they're doing really well now for whatever, mix of reasons. And that is something that I want. And I'm going to try to model after them or other people, or just get involved in the community, and can really take off that way.
Somebody watching or listening, and it's my observation, is you sound like a super intelligent, very eloquent person.
Thank
now,
you.
Why the hell would you would you have dealt with addiction when you were younger? I mean, that's dumb.
I mean,
you know what I'm saying.
For sure.
It's like, yeah, this guy comes off, tell me about your past.
Thank you. Yeah. I grew up here in Utah, and after these years of recovery and having done tons of healing work and therapy and trying to get to know myself better, I've really settled on the conclusion that for me, I was born, I'm a bisexual man, right? I'm in the LGBTQ community, and growing up here in Utah was incredibly challenging for me because of our culture and things like that and how we treat that community sometimes. And so I grew up also with a single mom who's a saint. But growing up with a single parent's hard for everybody in the family. And so I just, growing up, came to realize very early on that I didn't really fit in society like other people did. And I still feel that way today. That's a big part of my mental health journey and recovery that I'm improving and I'm working on. But I think early on, I just really struggled to build strong relationships and connection with my community. I felt very isolated, very alone, even within my own family. That was my own feeling. My family didn't necessarily do anything to impart that. But just growing up, I had all this baggage and this weight, and I didn't have the language to talk about it, right? My family doesn't talk about these things. They're from rural Idaho. So it's like I was growing up, and I had to figure out how to exist in the world, and I couldn't do it sober. I just couldn't. As soon as I got introduced to nicotine, cannabis, alcohol, I was one of those teenagers that's like, as soon as you start, you don't stop, Always had that reputation in my friend group that I was always the biggest partier and all that kind of stuff. And it's because I was in so much pain. And I didn't know how to name it. I didn't know how to address it. I didn't have the tools, right? And so I kept coping how I knew how to cope, which was drinking myself half to death for, I think it was about 10 years. From 15 to 25 is when I first got into recovery. I think at the end of the day, my addiction was never about the substance. That was my ability to cope with life. And it, to be honest, is the reason I'm still alive, that coping skill, right? I see a lot of...
Otherwise you would have tried to kill yourself or what?
Potentially. I mean, I've struggled with suicidality my whole life, still today. It's just a core feature of my mental health. It's much less strong than it ever was in the past. But especially my teenage years, alcohol and drugs helped me to relate to my peers, right? Because again, growing up here, I didn't fit in with the majority of the kids in my school who were a part of that predominant religion, right? And nothing against that religion. It's really just to say that I didn't fit in within that. And so my friend groups, I kind of think about this. I had two options as a child. I could stay kind of in that church life, or I could go into the rebellion side of things, and that's what I went into. And so I started partying, started rebelling in teenage ways, petty vandalism and little things, right? I'm not a good criminal. And so I never got into anything too intense in that realm, but I developed a really toxic relationship with substances from the beginning. And by the time I was 25, I could feel my internal organs hurting. Like, you're not supposed to be able to feel that as a 25-year-old, right? And so I did a lot of damage to my body and my mind and stunted my growth as a teenager. But at 25, I got the opportunity through 12-step to find that peer support angle, right? And find that there were people out there who had figured this thing out somehow. This thing that I had felt was entirely hopeless and I had no shot at, right? They made it seem possible. And so I just latched onto them, those people that had recovery, followed them around like a little school kid, and over the first few years, I got into peer support and I got into harm reduction, and I volunteered for a syringe exchange. I went to Switzerland to study their policy.
Really?
Yeah, as a study abroad trip. And that's how I got introduced to the concept of harm reduction and fell in love with it, was in Switzerland, because I really love their model and how they approach addiction and mental health challenges. It's very different from the U.S. And
what do they do that is so different?
Yeah. So, I mean, the main thing that stands out to a lot of people when I share it with them is they have prescribed heroin programs, right? It's medical grade heroin. It's not street product.
Right.
It's realistically medically safer than alcohol or most other drugs.
And do they have injection sites where people can?
Yeah. They have safe injection sites as well. They've had them for 40 years.
Really?
Most of the world, well, a lot of the world has bought into harm reduction as a medical intervention, right? To reduce disease, transfer, reduce overdose, and all of those things.
Sure.
They really, this is kind of my perspective, I suppose. Switzerland really treats it as a medical issue, right? Whereas in the US, we treat it as a moral issue, substance use specifically. If I have an addiction, it's my fault because I chose to use the substances. And there's an element of truth to that, 100%. But it demeans and disregards the aspects of addiction that are so powerful in our brain, right? And so they treat it, there's no morality in the conversation. So the legislators, the policymakers just address the medical issue.
So it's the same as a broken bone, cancer, diabetes, anything else.
As it should be, in my opinion, right? Like tying morality to substance use doesn't make any sense. People have used substances our entire lives, and we always will. And demonizing the substance itself or outlawing it or making it a big issue does more harm than good, for me at least, because then we're attacking the wrong thing. Whereas, like for me, my life's not about avoiding substances. It's about taking care of my mental health. Like I've got multiple different diagnoses and challenges that I still experience. Recovery hasn't been sunshine and rainbows for me a lot of the time. It has been at other times, right? It's been incredible, but it's also very hard for a lot of us. And so I always like to talk about that when I share my story, because it's important to acknowledge all parts of recovery in life, right? To stay balanced, at least for me.
Well, and I think that's realistic to talk about the fact that, I mean, I was a functional alcoholic for decades, and when I finally stopped, which was 13, 14 years ago, it wasn't fun. I mean, I consider my earlier times of getting screwed up at bars and parties and everything as fun. And fun changed, and it became more peaceful and quiet and things like so. And I'm glad that I'm sober, but you're right. It's not all roses. Your life goes better.
100%.
Your relationships go better. Your professional career goes better, but it's still not all.
Yeah, totally. And I think I've come to that conclusion or that theory throughout my recovery journey, right? I started very early on in 12-step, and it saved my life. The foundation that I still utilize today is so important for so many of us in early recovery. And a few years into that journey, I realized for me, maybe not for other people, but for me, it was very limiting in my beliefs and my ideas about recovery, because I was being exposed to harm reduction, which I view as recovery. I was being exposed to maintenance models of recovery for people who want to maintain their drinking or their cannabis use, and I've seen people be successful with these things. I've been successful with them myself, right? Utilizing medical cannabis and drinking socially occasionally. And I don't advocate for that for anyone else. I really just advocate for that or say that to say that recovery doesn't look the same for everybody. And peer support, social work, my social work education has helped me kind of broaden my view of what recovery can be, which also includes abstinence and moderation and medical cannabis and all these other things. And for me, I think that's just a much more inclusive way to bring more people into the recovery community. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where that's.
Do you think the U.S. will ever get to that point? It's okay to say no, because I don't think it will. I mean, not in my lifetime for sure.
I don't think so. I mean, you look at what Oregon tried, right? They tried a pretty progressive harm reduction policy, and they shut it down after 2 years before it could even get the chance to really work. I think they gave it 2 or 3 years. Don't quote me. I'm not an expert on that specific situation, but I do know that they ended it before it could even really take off. And so, and it wasn't implemented in the same ways as other countries were doing. I think they did a lot of stuff wrong. But I think that's a good example. Same thing as like the syringe exchange centers that are in New York City right now. They're federally illegal. They could be easily shut down on any given day, but the police, the federal government, everybody sees that in New York City, they're changing the neighborhoods that they're in. There's less syringe litter. There's less people just openly using on the streets because they have a safe place to go where people care about them and want them to be safe and healthy. And so for me, like I've completely shifted my definition of recovery from, being abstinent or anything like that. For me, it's about any positive change in their life. And they get to define that. I don't get to define that for them, right? They get to identify and see what their recovery journey is going to look like, and I'll support them every step of the way. But I have no business telling anyone else what their recovery should look like. And that's really kind of a foundational belief for me because that was important to me too. I had to be able to explore openly my recovery process and not just stay in one pathway of recovery. And I think that's important for a lot of people.
When you go back to your formative years, I'm gleaning from this that your sexuality is what prompted you to have problems socializing and everything else, and the alcohol helped. How did your sexuality put you in a position to want to use something to make things easier?
That's a really good question. And I've been digging into this myself really hard lately. And I think that for me, growing up, I had messaging all around me that part of humanity is evil, bad, or wrong, and that you're going to hell, right? Not every Christian or LDS person thinks that. I've had to be enlightened about that even recently in my life. I've been pretty critical of that faith because of how it affected me, and I don't want to be that way anymore. And so I'm trying to figure out how to process all of this in a way that allows me to develop and maintain my own spiritual belief system and not be angry about the harms that were caused to me as a kid when I didn't know any better. But growing up, I internalized all of that homophobia and I projected it onto other people, right? I made fun of the gay kids in high school, even though I was one. Yeah, 100%. Like for me, homophobia is
shitty.
It is shitty, right? I'm not proud of it, but like for me, that explains so much about our culture here in Utah is that if we just allowed people to explore and figure out who they are rather than shutting it down and calling it evil from the beginning, then like, I don't know, I could be out there married with kids and completely straight. I have no idea. I wasn't given the opportunity. And so I had 28 years of baggage that I had never voiced. It created in me, I have my own internal tendency to be very introverted and quiet sometimes. And so I maintained that role within my own family, within the community. I just became very meek, quiet, shy, because I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I had a place in this society, right? And so I learned to mask. And I learned how to behave based on the people around me. And so I just shared this with my mom the other day. Like I estimate that probably 70 to 80% of the things that I've wanted to say throughout my life, I didn't say.
Wow.
I filtered it out, right? I created all these different filters so that I could fit in because I knew that if I was authentic, when I tried to be authentic, I got made fun of or hurt in some capacity. And so I just realized that it was easier to go along.
Was that more of a perceived hurt or legitimate hurt from outsiders?
I think the majority of it is perceived in my own case.
Okay.
But I also recognize the severe harms that we cause to those communities through legislation and through other things. Like it's both. And for other people with a different path, like they've experienced that direct harm much more severely than I have, right? Because I only came out to my family within the last couple of years. I kind of still am in that process of coming out and sharing with my family who I really am. And they've been so supportive. And
I was going to ask you their response.
But like the thing is, I'm 30, I'm about to turn 33 next week. And it took me till 28 to be authentic with my own family. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I had this hardcore phobia of being outed to them. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they would disown me. They'd kick me out of the family. I'd be left alone out here, right? And so I knew that. I didn't tell anyone that. It was just a fact for me, right? And so as I got into recovery and I started to realize that I'm a lot more screwed up than I knew. I don't mean that derogatorily towards myself. I really just mean I have a lot of baggage to heal from. That's when I even started to acknowledge because every time that thought came into my brain, I shut it down. And then I had cannabis or alcohol and I could shut it down that way. And ironically, later on, when I was at the worst of my addiction, when I was blacked out drunk, that's the only time I would engage in those behaviors because it was the only time I could turn the shame off, right? And then that became its own form of like beating the crap out of myself, right? Because then the next day I'd be upset that I gave in and I did the evil thing. And it's just so insane to me now because like, I don't believe any of that. Like, that sexuality has nothing to do with it. And for me, it was such a foundational thing from early on that now I have all those years of baggage to process and work through, and which is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, and it's also really
You've
hard.
got enough
It's a lot of
time.
work. Yeah, totally, totally. And so that's really awesome. But I think, it was just that self-inflicted kind of victim mentality of, because I was a kid, I didn't know any better. I don't blame myself for that necessarily, but as an adult, my responsibility is to process and address that so that I can alleviate the negative behaviors that come as a result of that, right? Which is like being overly sensitive and creating conflict in conversations and things like that. So anyway, it's just to say that I really am working hard now. Like, I'm working harder now in recovery than I did in my first month on myself, which is wild to say. Like, the longer I go in recovery, the more kind of things I unravel within myself to work on and improve. And for me, that's what recovery is all about. In the long term, it's any focus on recovery that's just avoidance of substances, for me, is bound to fail eventually because you can't avoid them forever, right? So I really want to process and figure out why I use those substances, to your point earlier, that question. Because again, it's not about the substances. It's about healing the parts of myself that made me want to black out life in the first place. And so
took you until 28 to come out to your family.
Mm-hmm.
Are you surprised at the positive reaction you got as opposed to what you perceive the reaction might be?
I would say
you were talking about and worried about total rejection and everything.
Yeah, and I was. And to be totally transparent, they didn't really give me reasons to think that way. My family's amazing and they love me a lot. I just had internalized this messaging from the community, from society. That for me is the harm, is the messaging in society around identity and what's right and what's wrong and what's moral. But within my own family, they love me to death and they supported me every time. Like, they came and picked me up when I was blacked out, took me to detox. Like, they were there for me every step of the way. But I was shocked when they didn't kick me out of the family. And the only reason I was shocked was because I had 28 years of that thought in my brain, building and building and building until I couldn't control it anymore. It was just like a core, for me, negative part of who I was. It was pain and hurt and all that kind of stuff. And so now I'm in this process of being authentic within my family and having real relationships. And whereas before, like, we loved each other, obviously. We've grew up together and it was never a bad thing. It was just not as authentic as I wanted it, as I would hope that it would be. You know what I mean? For me, I wasn't showing up that way. And so I was placing a barrier between me and my family. And I've removed those barriers now. And I think that kind of big level of change is really hard for people. And that's understandable. Like, my family is just trying to figure it out, what that means for me inside of our family, what that means for our family overall. They're trying to grapple with it because they didn't see it coming. I never gave them a hint. You know what I mean? So it's just to say that I confronted my biggest fear in the world. That was 100% my biggest fear, was to sit down in front of my mom and especially my siblings, because I do still have some family members that are part of that church, which complicates this for me. But I think that my job is to get past that, is to get past my judgments and my preconceived notions about any individual who's a member of any group, right? And so I'm in this process of messy, like, outwardly showing myself to the world in a way that I never have. And that's incredibly hard. Like, I avoided those things every second of every day. And now I have to lean into the fact that I have to put my foot in my mouth and say something stupid and be embarrassed. You know what I mean? I'd rather that than keep that thought in my brain ever again. You know what I mean? And so I'm having to get used to things that I think normal people probably got used to in their teenage years, right? Like, I'm out here being a messy teenager at 32 in public. You know what I mean? So it's like, which is a good thing. I'm grateful for it. It's just to say that I'm figuring some stuff out that I would have loved to have figured out a long time ago.
Sure.
But that's life. And now my role is to try to just be the best version of myself that I can be. And that goes to my family, it goes to community, and my work in this field, right?
How many people do you run into in your work who are dealing with the same kinds of issues that you've dealt with?
Yeah.
I mean, how prevalent is it? I mean, some people talk about, I grew up and my dad was a meth cook or something, but you're talking about a different situation.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people experience it, right? And I think a lot of people experience it the same way I did. They experience it in silence and shame. Because whether it's intentional or not, that messaging is around us, that identity is wrong. And again, not everybody of any religious belief system believes all of that. But is out there. It causes legislation. Every year here in Utah, we have anti-LGBTQ legislation every single year. Same thing with many red states, to be honest, right? Like, it's not a safe identity, and it for sure wasn't when I grew up. And it's gotten a lot better. Obviously, we have pride. There's a lot more acceptance of it than when I was a kid, and definitely before that. But we still have a long way to go, because there's still kids out there that are internalizing these harmful messages, and the second they have a gay thought, they think they're evil and they're going to go to hell. You're not going to tell your parents that if they're in the church. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a very isolating feeling to grow up that way, I think. And
I'm an old fart, but I would maintain, and I'm totally heterosexual, okay, so I can't understand what you're feeling or thinking, but it seems to me that life has progressed much better over the decades in terms of dealing with these issues. Oh, yeah. We're not where we should be, but it's gotten better.
100%. Yeah. I mean, none of this is to say that the 8 years of recovery weren't worth it or weren't any of that. It's been an incredible ride, an incredible journey. I just love to talk about kind of the messy, dark parts of healing and growth, because we don't talk about those enough. Like, in early recovery, I got a lot of messaging that recovery is sunshine and rainbows, and then I got punched in the mouth a few times, and I was pretty pissed off. You know what I mean? And so that's, another story for another time. But I really, again, authenticity is kind of the buzzword for me right now. That's my biggest thing. And wherever I am, I want to be able to show up as myself, regardless of the consequences. And it's interesting that, like, other friends and people who have gone through a similar process, like I've got people who are in their 50s and 60s having that healing process. Sure. You know what I mean? And so some of us go through our entire life and never get to be authentic. And for me, that's what it always comes down to is how can I heal and be a better person as a result of these experiences? And then circling back to peer support, like, how can I share that lived experience with other people who may be struggling with the same thing, because they're out there. Sure. And there's a lot more of them than we think.
I'm glad you are sharing your experience with other people and helping to improve society, at the same time helping yourself. Sure. We're out of time. Thank you, Braden. I appreciate you coming and being honest and authentic, right? Is your family going to watch this?
My mom probably will. And we've been, oh, sorry. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Hi, Mom. You can say hi. And thank you for watching or listening to another edition of Odyssey House Journals.